Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Karen Johnson, the Earth Channel. Have another message for you from Gaia today. And in this second of a new series that I began last week, I would like to cover with you the 1156 channel, and that's in Human Design. So if you would like to run your chart, you can go to any free chart generator you like. The one I often recommend is called humandesignamerica.com/chart. And if you don't know your birth time for sure, start off trying with a noon birth time. And you can always message me if you have questions about that, and I can have a conversation with you about potentially rectifying that a little bit to see what resonates best with you. So, if you watched last week's video, I covered the 659 channel, and I talked specifically about compromises. So to help you understand what a compromise is, once you've run your charts, pause this video if you haven't done that already. A compromise is what happens in any kind of relationship, friendship or otherwise, that where one person has a full channel defined. And if a channel is defined in your chart, it will be completely colored in with either red or black or some combination of those. And that means once that channel is defined, that both centers at either end of that channel will also be colored in or defined. And so with this particular channel, it's a channel that connects the third eye center, or ajna, which is a triangle. If it's defined in your chart, it will be green, depending on which chart generator you choose. If you use Human Design America, it will be. And the throat center, which is a square, and it will be brown if it's defined. Both centers, if they are open, will be white. And then the other person in this friendship or relationship, if there is a compromise in any channel or gate, no matter whether it's this one or not, they only have one of those gates in that same channel defined, not both sides. And so I have an example to share with you today. I have a subscriber named Geoff who's in the UK, and he has been studying human design and other types of astrology for a while now, maybe as long as I have, I don't know for sure. But he had come across a site where they calculate a sidereal human design chart for you. They have the software all set up already. I personally don't have software that does what I do, but I do interpret sidereal human design to be different. And he was having a little trouble understanding that, I think partly because he had already seen this one way of doing it. Plus, it is a bit of a complex thing to understand. So I was trying another way or two to describe it, and it helps in these kinds of things to have a conversation, some back and forth, and so that I can understand what someone has perceived in the past and understood, and I can contrast and compare with that. So the way that these folks have been interpreting sidereal human design is that not only do the signs shift, but also the gates. They just take all those gates and shift them with them. And as I've explained in previous videos, I explained it in depth 2 weeks ago, and I did ask if Geoff had seen that one. He had not, but even after he went back and watched it, he wasn't fully sure he was getting it. But once I heard some more of those questions, I tried again, and I said, it's really important to me, I think, to not shift those gates, which are tied to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. And as I've explained before, that's because where they are already, according to the tropical zodiac, or at least where they were originally intended by Ra-Uru-Hu when he channeled this knowledge into the world back in 1987, more or less, they align with all the 8 gates in the diamond heart, diamond in the center of the chart, also known as the G center. It has 8 gates, and they all align with the equinoxes or solstices or the midpoints in between those, known sometimes as the pagan holidays. And so if you shift all of those gates with the signs of the sidereal zodiac, they don't align anymore. And so that's why I don't think that was an accident. I think that was very purposeful and significant. And so that's why I leave them exactly where they were. I don't use any other software to calculate human design charts. But I do use a photo editing tool in order to rotate the signs, excuse me, to be where they actually were in the sky when this knowledge was channeled into the world in 1987. Because tropical astrology does not account for the precession of the equinoxes, which is caused by a very slow shift in the wobble of the axis of the Earth. And that departure happened so long ago that now the tropical zodiac, which Western astrologers use, is almost a full sign different from the sidereal zodiac, which many astrologers use, but primarily Vedic astrologers. And so I just rotate it on my own with this photo editing tool. I don't have software at this time. I'd love to hopefully get some someday that, someone who can create it for me where it automatically does that. But for the most part, human design doesn't put a heavy emphasis, unless you get really into it, upon where each gate lands as far as the constellations or the signs. And so most of the time in lots of different chart generators, you can get away without worrying about this particular shift in the way that I interpret sidereal astrology. I do have other software that I use for just regular astrology or astrological readings, Vedic astrology readings. And there are lots of different things I love to do with that. And I have no problem with people experimenting and doing different things on their own if they have this software or want to go find it and experiment with it. I have no problem with that at all. I just personally don't feel that that is a valuable thing that I want to pursue. But I am completely open, and that's one of the things about the ajna center. I personally do have the throat center defined by a different channel, but I only have one of the gates defined in that channel, the 1156. I only have the 11th gate. And I'm sort of pointing to my neck because it sort of runs that way in the body graph as the charts are laid out to look as though they correlate more or less with our bodies. But Geoff, on the other hand, like I said, does have that full channel defined. And when you have that ajna center, that third eye center defined, you have a much more set way of looking at things, thinking about things, more certainty about your philosophies or the truths that you perceive as truths in the world. Whereas those of us who have that center open can see from many different points of view pretty easily and see that there is truth in all of them. Those of my friends who have that center defined, whenever I've spoken to them about these different concepts, especially when they're contrasting with, more than one theory that I personally like to explore, or their personal point of view that they adhere to. When I have known that my friends have that center defined and I've spoken to them about these things, it's just almost impossible sometimes for them to fully come around to seeing that maybe there's another way of looking at it. And it just tends to not be something that we really want to keep discussing. So if you have a compromise like this, and in contrast to last week's channel that we focused on, this one does not involve any motors or centers that produce energy when it is defined. These centers are, well, one of them's an awareness center, I think that's correct. They're different categories. Don't worry about that. But it's not as much of a zing, so there's not as much pressure when this compromise happens, especially if one or more of the person's centers who has just the one gate are open. Sometimes a person who has an open throat center can feel pressure to talk and to say the things perhaps that the person with the defined center is not saying. And when a person has an open ajna or third eye center, they can feel some pressure to, they just can sometimes hear the thoughts that are going through that other person's head, and can sometimes even speak those thoughts, whether they have the throat center open or not, and can be accused of either reading someone's mind or stealing their ideas, when there was very likely no intention whatsoever of stealing anything, or they may not even know that it was the other person's thought to begin with. So the way to deal with this as best you can is to, always take a moment, pause, breathe, let that energy flow, and get in touch with whatever centers you do have defined. If you don't have it defined, you might even need to take a little more time. I'm not necessarily saying the same thing as a lot of other people who are sort of in the mainstream of human design, who would say that reflectors who have all centers open have to take an entire month before they can make a decision, and that's just not possible with some things. But if you can at least take a little bit of time to feel out where that energy is coming from, where it wants to go to. Like I said last week, or actually Gaia said last week, you can always ground. You can always send that energy down into Mother Earth and let whatever you need come back to you. The way I tried to deal with it with Geoff was to begin to access the energy of that 56th gate, which is about stimulating the ideas of that 11th gate, which are located in the third eye. And you have to be a little bit careful when you are trying to access these new energies that you may not be as familiar with, but just hold your intention for the highest and best of all concerned. And if it feels okay to you, you can certainly attempt to access it and ask for it from Gaia, or ask for it from the heavens, your helpers, your guides, your angels. And what often needs to happen with that 56th gate energy is for a little bit of more emphasis to occur. And it does help a little bit also to access the energy from your throat center. And of course, that is also helped by aligning all the chakras, all the centers, and hopefully building upon. And that's where the grounding is helpful as well. Once you can release energy into Gaia, the earth, Mother Earth, and then let it come back up through your feet, through the root, sacral, solar plexus, and all those centers, heart, and then let it build up to the throat. That's when you can really feel where it needs to happen, this emphasis, this focus, and then the stimulation, if that's the particular energy that you're dealing with. So I tried to be as loving as possible when I was responding to Geoff's last questions. I did say, just to really emphasize, that the gates, in my opinion, do not change. And of course, that's just one way of looking at it, but that's the way I'm going with. The gates, the 64 hexagrams, do not change from the regular, typical, tropical placements that they started out with in most chart generators. And emphasize that only the sidereal signs shift to align with the stars where they were or are right now. And it also helped, I think, to emphasize, because he thought that I was using software, and I had not made that point clear, that I was not using any software, certainly not any software created by anybody else. And I was only to get that alignment using a photo editing tool. And I worked pretty hard to get just that. And I had to do some pretty precise calculations, which I don't expect any of you to get into. But when you are hearing me talk about these things, even if you don't fully understand them, hopefully what you're actually getting and enjoying from my messages is that higher vibration of energy, that possibility that all of these different types of energy can be accessed by all of us if we want them, and to be grateful for those energies that we already have that we can count on. So, for example, I talked about the sacral and the solar plexus or emotional center last week, and those are motor centers. And if you have those defined, those can be the most important centers for you to get in touch with in your chart, in your body, because they will only operate to really support you if they're really, you have this intelligence, throughout your body in these centers, if they're on board with whatever it is that you're thinking about doing. So, for example, if you have a defined sacral, which is most of us, you really need to get a kind of response from your sacral center before you embark upon anything, especially that takes a lot of energy, because that is the most powerful motor in the body. The emotional center, on the other hand, it just has emotional waves. I talked about this last time, that finding the clarity of the midpoint, not making decisions on a high or a low. You don't have to worry about those as much with these two centers, the throat and the third eye. But it is thoughts, and it is our voice and our words. And so those are important, and they have their own power as well. But they always work best when they're supported by this other energy, and we have a certain awareness in our other centers as well, and we're evolving to have even more awareness in, for example, our abdomen, our emotional center especially. And so that change is gradually coming. In the meantime, we are still moving out of the idea that our thoughts are king, our thoughts are all. And our thoughts are important, but they are only as valuable as we make them, only as valuable as we decide that we want them to be. We put our focus there, we put our energy there. And so it is very appropriate to be very conscious of what your thoughts are and which ones you're focusing upon. Now, I don't necessarily believe that you can always just make something happen by focusing upon it. The power of positive thinking. Sometimes we have to work through negative thoughts and see where they came from, release them before we can really fully embrace the more positive thoughts. But that's where those other centers come in. It's best to see what lights us up, especially down in our lower bodies. See, and it's not like a sexual thing. It's not being turned on necessarily. But that's why I like the phrase being lit up. What makes us come alive? And once we really feel that in our bodies, it becomes much easier to focus on whatever that is and the thoughts around it, and to speak about it to ourselves and to our friends, everyone around us. And it's also another really good thing tied to these centers and this channel in particular. It's a projected channel, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, but it is best with projected channels, if you're going to be talking about something, always do it from your own perspective and understanding that it may not necessarily be someone else's point of view, and accepting that possibility. Where you need to wait with these channels and with these centers, when you think you might need to or should give some advice. It's always best to either wait until that advice is asked for, or if you already can feel that you're being prompted to go ahead and speak about this, ask them if they're open to hearing it. Say, I just have a thought to share with you about this particular situation or topic, and I'm just wondering if you would mind if I go ahead and share my point of view. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. That's the healthiest way to express these projected channels that connect to the throat, that connect to the third eye, ajna, is with a grain of salt. Just understanding that whatever you're perceiving with those channels, and they do have wonderful powers of perception, but it may just be for you, yourself. It may not necessarily be for anyone else unless they ask for it or unless they are open to it. So with that, I hope that helps with the idea of compromise. Please say in the comments which channel you might like me to cover next. And now we will check in with Gaia and see what she has to add to this. Take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if you'd like. So Gaia wants me to emphasize that these human design charts, in some ways, are just a way to get you started thinking about the possibilities within you. They are by no means the limit of what is possible within you. And in that respect, it almost doesn't matter if your chart is wrong. Granted, I have seen where people usually resonate more with one chart over another. And it's always wonderful to feel heard, feel seen, feel understood when you can see a chart and begin to understand it in a way that does resonate with you. So we invite you to have a conversation with Amy. Send her the chart that you're starting out with. Send her a couple other charts that might be possibilities based upon different birth times. Amy can see a lot with these charts, but she is far from omniscient. Letting Gaia speak about me here. Usually I speak about what she has to say, but still coming through me. We're a bit merged right now. And yes, it's true. I am not omniscient. I make mistakes. I need to do things 2 or 3 times sometimes. I can see a lot. And sometimes when I talk about these complicated concepts, you can come to believe that perhaps I know everything about you just from looking at one chart, but that is not the case. What I can see is some of the choices that have been laid before you, either in the past or in the present, or perhaps in the future. I cannot see how you've made those choices in the past or present, or how you will make them in the future. And that is a big part of who you are. And so that is where I need more information. I need to even work with you on what question it is exactly that you're wanting to ask. And so far, I have not become overwhelmed with people asking me things about their charts and their relationships. If that does happen where I get to the point where I am overwhelmed, I will have to pause. But for now, you may go ahead and send me a message. I include my email address in the text below the video and on Facebook. So let's talk about what these possibilities are, what resonates with you. and where it is exactly that you're focusing right now. Give me a little more detail about what the conundrum is, and I'll be able to help you even more. And I do ask that you give me feedback in exchange for this, at least with one response after I have sent you a reading or some insights. Even if it's bad feedback, I welcome your feedback that says, no, that's not quite it. And it could be because your chart is a little off. It could be because we haven't really honed in on your question or area of focus. Or it could be that I have something more to learn about these different channels and different charts and different centers as they are in your chart. Everyone is different. That's a beautiful thing about us. And so, yes, Gaia did think that that was important to say. That having a dialogue together is the best way. Newt is joining us here. Excuse the moving of the camera. Is the best way to really get to the bottom of things. And there's always a way to bring love in, unconditional love, universal love. That's really what we're going for. But like I said before, once we can really define the issue in a way that resonates with you, it feels so good to get a better understanding of it. And it can really help us to let go of whatever we need to let go of once we finally understand that issue. And then once we've let go of it, there's even more room for love to come in. And like I said, and Gaia encouraged us to do last time, it's always a good time to take a breath and try to get that energy flowing more throughout your whole body. It's only when we're holding on to things and letting them get stuck that they can really start to hurt us. Who and what we are is an infinite being of love. And that true identity can never be harmed. It's only an illusion that we chose to experience in this lifetime so that we could learn from it. And I know that might trigger some people to hear that we chose some very difficult situations in this lifetime. And it's not that we chose them with our conscious minds, it's that we chose them when we were not incarnated yet, because we knew that that's what we needed to learn. And so, having gone through some very troubling times myself, and having been in that place where there was no way I could see that I had chosen it, ever, resenting the fact that I had to go through those things, and not really seeing how I was going to get out of it at those times. I can honestly say now that having been through them, I do feel stronger. I feel unafraid to go through them again. And yes, sometimes I had to let go of things that I loved, some part of who I thought was my identity even. I had to let go of it, at least in that moment, in that situation. I had to let it go. But what helped me to do that and to get through it and to let go of my resistance was to realize that who and what I am was never going to change, was never going to stop being that way. And even if I couldn't express it in that one particular situation anymore fully the way I wanted, it didn't mean that I couldn't express it somewhere else at other times. And it also didn't mean that there weren't many other beautiful ways for me to be, to express, to help sometimes, and to love, no matter what. And that's part of what inspired me to begin these videos, was finding that outlet where I could express to my heart's content. And so Gaia invites you to consider that who and what you are is greater than you have previously imagined, more wondrous and beautiful than you may have considered before. You are loved beyond measure. Deep breath, let it go. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste, beloveds. Thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing, and clicking the bell button to be notified when the new weekly message comes out.